welcome to Catholic Wisdom, or welcome back if you're not new to the channel. The wisdom in the channel name is obviously not my wisdom, but the one that we can learn from the Christian tradition. I want to specify that. And talking about wisdom, the 7 wisdom books included in the Catholic Bible are some of the most powerful, most lyrical and beautiful sacred texts of the scriptures. So in this series, I'm reading the Wisdom of Solomon, or Book of Wisdom, one chapter at a time. And some of you, in fact, asked me to cover all 19 chapters of the Book of Wisdom. I will try and do what I can, but with the help of commentaries, I will shed light on some crucial passages, point out where Greek philosophy blends with Jewish tradition, and sometimes even refer back to the original text in the ancient Greek, which is a language that I studied in a previous life, many years ago. The first 5 chapters of the Wisdom of Solomon that we have seen in the previous videos of this series, if you haven't, please go to my playlist to find them, can be considered as a single unit. And they give us a broad fresco about the righteous and the unrighteous men in this world, and also about God's ultimate justice and eternal life. From chapter 6 to chapter 9, we have a long poetic reflection on wisdom as a divine gift to the righteous man. And this is considered to be the main portion or the core message of the Book of Wisdom. So this reflection starts with a monologue by the ideal author Solomon. This is why it's called the Pseudo-Solomon, who throws out 3 very specific appeals to all the kings and leaders of the earth. The first one is at verse 1 and 2, the second one at verses 9 and 11, and the third one at verse 21 of chapter 6. That's because wisdom was not only individual wisdom in everyone's life, but also the art of government. As always, we have a very strong echo of Greek philosophy in the Book of Wisdom, especially if we think about, for example, Plato's king's philosopher or philosopher king. From Plato onward, many Greek philosophers had talked and written about this particular type of wisdom. So after this sort of perennial that ends with verse 21, chapter 6 from verse 22 to verse 26, which is the end of the chapter, introduces the core address by Solomon that will then start with chapter 7. So let's get started with verse 1. I'm reading the translation by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and it goes like this. Hear therefore, kings, and understand. Learn, you magistrates of the earth expanse. Give ear, you who have power over multitudes, and lord it over throngs of people, because authority was given you by the Lord, and sovereignty by the Most High, who shall probe your works and scrutinize your counsels. Very interesting how immediately the author of the book brings us back, it reminds us of the very beginning of the Book of Wisdom, and it brings us back to the universal scope of the first lines of the book itself, bringing it back to the entire earth. He's not talking about only some local leaders or some local kings, but he's thinking about all kings and all leaders of the nations of the world, which is fascinating because here is a Jewish author who lives probably in Alexandria, therefore in a very Greek environment from a cultural point of view. And so, yes, he is referring to the Hellenistic monarchies and the Greek kings of his times and before. But he's probably, and this is what commentaries say about this, he is probably most of all referring to the Roman Empire, to the Roman emperors, because who was more powerful than them in this day and age, around the time of Jesus really, the 1st century before Jesus and the 1st century after. So there is a universality, but there is also a practicality in including or implying, let's say, an appeal to the Roman emperors. Then in the first 2 lines, we have already a fascinating repetition of a particular Greek term, which is ges or gen, which means earth or land, that is a repetition from the last lines of the previous chapter, of chapter 5. So I'm going to try and show you the actual original Greek text of the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6. And based on my ancient studying of this language, I'm going to try and read 2 lines out of it. The last 2 lines of chapter 5 go Kai eremosei pasan ten gen anomia, kai e kakopragia peritrepsei thronus dynaston. And chapter 6, accusate un basileis, kai zunete. Accusate means more listen than hear. Mathete dicastai peraton ges. We have gen at the end of chapter 5 and ges at the beginning of chapter 6. It's basically a literary device. It works like a hook to connect the two chapters in a very elegant way. And so fundamentally, what is this proemio telling us? It's telling us that the power, the incredible power that kings on earth have, is not their power. It's power that comes from God. Their authority comes from God, from heaven. This might sound almost for granted or banal today, but in their time, let's remember that the most powerful person on earth, in their world, was somebody, the Roman emperor, who said that he was divine. So there was no difference between him and a god. He was God. So it really makes a difference, and it's countercultural to hear somebody say, your power is not your power. It actually derives from God. The next verses from verse 4 take us back to the concept of God's justice that we've seen at the end of chapter 5. And they go, because though you were ministers of his kingdom, you did not judge rightly, and did not keep the law, nor walk according to the will of God. Terribly and swiftly he shall come against you, because severe judgment awaits the exalted. For the lowly may be pardoned out of mercy, but the mighty shall be mightily put to the test. Fascinating portion here, because the concept is so present, is so current, if we think about it. He's saying that the love of God doesn't really discriminate. The poor, the rich, the lowly, the high, etc. But God requires, demands a more careful sense of responsibility from the higher-ups, from the people who are made kings and leaders and emperors. Their mistakes, their weaknesses and their shortcomings obviously are more important in the world because they have so many consequences that God will mightily put them to the test, while for the lowly, they may be pardoned out of mercy. It's a very, very fascinating distinction because it almost sounds like discrimination, but God is not discriminating anybody. God is simply saying, remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Verse 9, to you therefore, O princes, are my words addressed, and this is Solomon speaking, that you may learn wisdom, and that you may not fall away. For those who keep the holy precepts aloud will be found holy, and those learned in them will have ready a response. Desire therefore my words, long for them, and you will be instructed. The author uses a very, very strong verb here in the ancient Greek verse, verse number 12, where he says, long for them, long for my words. This longing, the Greek verb is epithumesate, which means to long, but it's more to desire in such an intense way that this verb was very often used in Greek poetry or Greek philosophy and writings to signify and to describe the love between partners, a man and a woman. So it would be the desire, almost like a carnal desire. Solomon is encouraging the kings to desire his words of wisdom with a special intensity, with almost a carnal desire. Verse number 12, resplendent and unfading is wisdom, and she is readily perceived by those who love her, and found by those who seek her. She hastens to make herself known to those who desire her. One who watches for her at dawn will not be disappointed, for she will be found sitting at the gate. Now, another fascinating technical aspect of the following portion here is that it's using a technique to argue that was proper of the Stoics, of the Stoic philosophy. And this particular technique implies using the second term of a comparison as the first term of the next comparison. And so we can find it here, starting with verse number 17. And it goes, for the first step toward wisdom is an earnest desire for discipline. Then, care for discipline is love of her. Love means the keeping of her laws. To observe her laws is the basis for incorruptibility. And incorruptibility makes one close to God. Thus, the desire for wisdom leads to a kingdom. Isn't it fascinating here how the structure can be summarized starting from verse 17 as A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, F, and then the conclusion. It's a very structured type of argument. And again, Greek philosophy that really pours into the Book of Wisdom. And finally, the verses from 22 to 25 are the actual introduction, we can call it, of the speech that will come with chapter number 7. And with chapter number 7, it's Solomon's monologue to the rulers of this world that will really constitute the core of the Book of Wisdom, of the Wisdom of Solomon. And so at verse 22, it says, "Now what wisdom is and how she came to be, I shall proclaim. And I shall conceal no secrets from you, but from the very beginning I shall search out and bring to light knowledge of her. I shall not diverge from the truth, neither shall I admit consuming jealousy to my company, because that can have no fellowship with wisdom. A multitude of the wise is the safety of the world, and a prudent king the stability of the people. So, take instruction from my words to your profit." And of course, not only the rulers of the world, but we should also take instructions, and we should profit from these beautiful and wise words of Solomon. Thank you again for listening and for watching, and God bless you. Bye.